Fantastic. So, greetings to everyone for our sixth episode of Teacher Talk, sponsored by the Falcon Feathers. That stands for Future Educators in the Arts Transforming Human Experience and Realities. My name is Christopher Hansen. I have the distinct privilege of serving my students at Seattle Pacific University as the Director of Music Education and Director of Orchestral Activities. I miss seeing my students in person, but I'm so grateful for the technology that we have, allowing us to reach out and still be connected with each other intellectually and keep asking really important questions about music and education and what this new time we're operating in looks like. Important questions that really haven't lost their significance, even though the landscape of how we're teaching and engaging with each other might be changing and evolving. There are important things that we need to consider, and today I am thrilled to have Bob and Pam Phillips with us for a conversation that will begin with the importance of sort of diversifying programming, particularly in music programs, but also thinking about alternative styles for instrumental programs or vocal music programs or even general music programs. How do we challenge what I consider sort of the status quo, these programs we've inherited, musical programs and styles that are perpetuated in specific districts or cities or states that might be really popular, but might not give us a better worldview or understanding of what else exists out there. So, Bob and Pam are truly experts in this field and have done so much work through the publishing and composing and arranging and workshops that they facilitate all over the country, all over the world. And in doing this, I'm thrilled to have them here with us. If you are not familiar with this platform, if you're looking at it for the first time, I am thrilled to have you with us. We are running this as a Zoom session so that we can have a conversation, but we are recording it and we have it up on Facebook Live. In fact, that reminds me, I want to record it in Zoom also. And so as we're going, you can comment on this conversation. You can post comments or questions that you might have. And I will be looking up. I've got a second screen that I can monitor to bring those questions into the conversation. I always apologize to the people that I'm talking to. I hate when I have to break eye contact, so I'm not ignoring you, but I am checking for questions and people that are tuning in. Again, it's great to see you guys. I see Zachary Harwell, a friend of mine from Texas, is already watching. So thank you guys for being here and joining this conversation. Again, don't be shy to post comments and questions that you have while we're talking, and then I'll bring those into the conversation with our time together. Before I turn it over to Bob and Pam to tell us a little bit about themselves, if you are not familiar with their work and the things that they have accomplished and continue to do, you're in for a real treat. I'm so thrilled for those of you that aren't familiar with them to get introduced to the incredible things that they're doing. But I want to start with a brief prayer just to set the mood and just show an opportunity of thanksgiving for this chance to connect with each other. However you participate in prayer, if you want to join me, recite these words after I say them, or if you simply just want to listen, you are welcome to participate however you feel comfortable. Lord, thank you for the resources that we have and for the opportunities that are being created to stay connected. As we appropriately practice social distancing, please help us to maintain a physical distance without losing our emotional and spiritual and intellectual distance. Help us grow closer together as we struggle through this unique time together. Help us to ask important questions that strengthen us as educators and as artists. We thank you for this time. We thank you for these opportunities and these resources. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
So, Bob and Pam, again and again, thank you for your time and for connecting with me. I'm so thrilled to be talking to you. Bob, I got to meet you in person for the first time and hopefully not the last at a wonderful event here in Washington. And I'm just so excited. It really was, I was kind of starstruck because I've used your books and known about you for years. And it was just amazing to be able to meet you in person and see you work. I would love for others that are watching to get to know more about what you and your incredible partner have been doing. So tell us about yourself.
Okay. Well, hi everybody. It's great to be here, and hope everybody's staying safe and staying sane. More than that, I feel for you if you have little kids at home. So basically, my background is that I was a public school orchestra teacher in Saline, Michigan, outside Ann Arbor. It was a small farm town when I went there, and I was there for 27 years, and and built a really big string program. We had 720 string players when I left, and the high school was about 1,400 students when I left, and we had 220 string players, 5 orchestras, so on and so forth. So that was my background in education. Did a lot of youth orchestras and all states, that kind of thing through the years, and then partway through, I have always been doing a lot of writing. I started publishing, and so with Alfred Publishing, Fiddler's Philharmonic, and a lot of books. And
that was the first one.
That was the first one, yeah. Sound Innovations is a huge project we've written. Anyway, so I left teaching after 27 or 28 years. It's a little hard to explain, but anyway, around that time, and went to work for Alfred as their director of string publications, and then just spent the last 16 years doing a lot of state MEA clinics and national clinics and all states and things, and writing a lot. And that's my background, and I'll let Pam tell you about hers.
And you're recently retired from Alfred.
And I'm recently retired, yes.
Yes.
I retired about a year.
My background was in business as a career. I did play piano growing up, so I had some music background. Then raised 3 string players, lived with a string teacher, which sort of pulls everybody into their vortex. But so eventually I left the business I was in and started handling all of the logistical business side of the orchestra program Bob was running, because he had himself way overextended. And when he went to work with Alfred, eventually I ended up working for them, and I was the Suzuki editor, handled the Suzuki catalog.
Oh, wow.
Them, and I retired a year and a half ago. So passed that on to another lady who's doing a great job with it.
And Pam's a copyright expert too.
I did publish a book on copyright, which grew out of my frustration with every music teacher I talked to, including Bob, as we started doing things that used copyrighted music in the ensembles we were running. They'd say, oh, it's okay if you do this, or it's okay if it's for education. And one guest artist we had in took me aside as they were leaving and said, you guys are doing wonderful stuff. However, you've really messed up this copyright, and here's what you should be doing with my music if you use it and record it. That was rather embarrassing. So at that point, I decided I was going to start researching it. And I did a lot of work with copyright and contracts at Alfred, and it ended up as a book that was came out a few years ago. So that's how I got here.
This is a perfect segue, I think, to one of the things that I'm personally passionate about, and that's trying to use popular music in my classroom. And I know that this is a huge question, so forgive me. I'm starting off strong, because this is something I really wanted to, Bob, even when I met you just 2 months ago, I wanted to pick your brain about this. The big question is, why do you think so many public school music programs in particular, but really a lot of music programs, community music programs, even church music programs, are sort of committed to playing certain repertoire and then struggle to sort of branch out of that? And then the more specific part of that is, so for me, I was always really passionate about trying to use music that my students listened to and that they liked, and popular music, and immediately came across, concerns about copyright and trying to navigate that, where IMSLP is a classical musician's best friend. We get so excited about these resources that are getting published and are claimed to be in public domain, and being able to rehearse them and practice them. But what is that, do you think copyright is one of the primary issues that people are afraid to branch out into newer music or newer genres and styles? Or just what are your thoughts about that?
Well, let me start by the fundamental question. Why do we choose the repertoire we do, and how should we choose repertoire? And this is a bit of a long-winded answer, but I think it's an important answer. So first of all, as a string player, playing the violin, playing the bass, playing the cello, playing a string instrument is not a genre. Not a genre. It's been portrayed as that. It's been portrayed as something that you play music from, written from 1600 to now by, quote unquote classical composers. Yeah. But really, any music in the world is fair game, because pretty much every culture in the world has some sort of string instrument tradition. They look different, but there's a bowed string instrument or plucked string instrument tradition almost everywhere. Same thing with singers. Same thing with wind players. The instrument shouldn't define the genre that you play.
Yeah.
More importantly, the question that I ask myself every day as a young teacher, I would get up and I would say, am I preparing kids for my past or their future?
Wow.
And that was an important question for me. That led me down a path that was pretty outside the norm as a young teacher, exposing kids to lots of kinds of music and using that as an integral part of my curriculum. Now, we had a highly successful orchestra program. We've performed at Midwest Clinic. We did a lot of things. We had a fiddle group that toured the world, played the White House 5 times, did a lot of cool stuff, Kennedy Center. So we had high success, but kids had skills to do lots of different kinds of things. Part of the message for that, in terms of preparing them for their future, I felt that to limit them to a very narrow range of musical styles was not in their best interest. That to give kids the musical skills to explore the kind of music they wanted to, or to play in the kind of groups that they wanted to, was important. Secondarily, playing just quote unquote classical music, there's a certain process and tradition we have for that. It's very well thought out. We've got great pedagogy, whether it be vocal, whether it be choir teachers or band teachers or orchestra teachers. It's very well thought out. We keep tweaking it, but we know how to do that.
Yeah.
There's a certain way you do it. A lot of it has to do with literacy. One of the keys to classical music is literacy. You have to be literate in order to access it, at least for once you get past a very early stage. But the difference in music of the rest of the world is not transmitted that way, nor is it learned that way. It's a very different process for how you teach it. So part of the answer to me in this whole thing is the reason that I think people have not embraced completely the idea of other kinds of musics is that it's trickier to teach. They have to, if not trickier, at least it's just the process is different, and it's perhaps a little bit messier. And so people have shied away from it, because older generations, they just didn't know how to do it. And, we're always reticent to jump into things we don't know how to do sometimes. Second of all, the structure of our ensembles didn't lend themselves always to making this easy. And I'll give you a little example of that. The people that have accessed world musics from around the world, and remember, world music is a term that depends on your perspective.
Yeah.
One of my friends that grew up in Venezuela was part of El Sistema says, yeah, well, bluegrass is world music to me.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right. So I think one of the things that that happened is certainly vocal teachers, choir teachers have probably had the greatest success in doing this because the access point is a little easier for them. I think orchestras have had some success. I think it's most difficult for wind players because of the structure of the ensemble. For bands, concert bands, certainly they've had great success in jazz. No doubt about that. And so in different kinds of musics, and genres lend themselves to certain instruments or voices better than others. You can access everything, but the point is, with this long explanation I've just given, is that I think I want to frame this one thing, and then we'll have Pam talk about the copyright thing.
Well, I have something else I want to add too.
Okay, I also think the question is, as music teachers, is so if we have a student, let's assume you teach them 5th grade through 12th grade, and you have the whole program yourself. Okay, if you did, and that's what I did. I taught all the levels, so my whole life pretty much. So I'm going to probably, and I just trust me on the math, it works out. If you have a kid for 8 years, they're probably going to play between 100 and 120 pieces with you in those 8 years.
Yeah.
given the number of concerts on average, the number of pieces per concert.
And you mean not method book pieces, but
Yes, I'm talking
orchestra.
about,
Yeah.
performance
Repertoire.
pieces you do
Uh-huh.
Right.
on a stage or in a gym or in a cafeteria or wherever. And so the thing is, that's a desert island question to me. If I know a student's total musical experience is based on 120 pieces,
Wow.
what pieces do I pick and why? Well, it gets back to my original point that the frustrating part about that is there's no way I can, even just with classical music, 120 pieces, I can't really expose them to all the great composers of the classical genre, let alone I go down the path of, American folk traditions, Latin American music, African music. I mean, I can't begin to. What I can do, however, I can give them the musical skills that allow them to access those kinds of musics, meaning they have to be able to read, but they have to be able to learn orally.
Yeah.
That's the key. If they can't do both those things, they've got limited access to a lot of musics of the world. I can give them a broad and a background and pique their interest in various things, so that because part of my goal was when they left me, my hope was that they'd be interested enough that they would want to pursue and other kinds of musics and any kind of music and continue to play, use that as an important part of their life. Many of my students have done that. Not everybody, but Pam, you were going to add something.
Yeah, a little bit more on the nitty gritty side of things. Because often when we're out and about doing workshops, if Bob's conducting, I'm in the back of the room talking with the teachers. If it's 500 kids, I'm in the back of the room. They usually put the kids that are less advanced in the back, and then they're lost because they're so far away from him. So I work back of the room. So I'm around the teachers a lot when they're watching what he's doing. And they're I would say, of course, not everybody, but if they have never been exposed to other kinds of music, they're very nervous about it. They're a little bit scared of it, not sure how to start, not sure where to dip their toes in, and very insecure about it. That's probably the biggest thing that comes across is insecurity and where to start. And they look at what he's doing and they're like, well, I can't do that, Well, everybody has to start someplace. And the teachers who have had the most fun with it, I would say, are the ones that go to the kids, whatever ensemble they've got, and say, look, I've never done this either, but I saw this guy do it. It's really cool. Let's figure it out together. And then they're not claiming to be the expert, from the podium, whatever that saying is.
A sage on the stage.
Sage on the stage, yeah. They're not claiming that. They're saying, let's explore other kinds of music. And it is taught and learned a little differently. So they may be learning along with the kids, or they might be a week ahead of the kids. And I think that's all changing because music has gradually been taught differently over the last 10 to 15 years, I would say. For a while, it wasn't going to change. I mean, the teachers who had been teaching orchestra, I can speak to orchestra more clearly on that, say they thought about doing fiddle music. They're just like, I don't know how to play the ornaments. I don't know exactly what that ornament's supposed to sound like when I read it. I'm just not doing it. And we've gotten away from that as the generations have changed, but there's still a lot of people who grew up in a very traditional orchestral setting, and probably the same with band and vocal. And they're just insecure to try it. And so I would say your first question that you started with, something about how do they choose the repertoire, I would say most people choose what they grew up with.
Yeah.
Need to the people talk, because that's where I'm a lot of times listening to the teachers as they just talk.
And we're all attracted to different musics, right? There's certain musics out there, I won't label them right now, but that, if I'm sitting around at home, might not be my first choice to put on, Pandora or whatever.
But not everybody likes the same colors either.
No, it's right. We don't all like the same colors, right? So,
color.
I mean, some people like red, some people like yellow, green's their favorite color, whatever. But I think the important part there is even though I didn't particularly like a certain kind of music, I tried not to let that get between me and what the students were being exposed to, so that they got some exposure, even if it wasn't something that I was going to go home and listen to a lot or practice or whatever. But on the other hand, it's good for us as musicians, just for our own well-being, to explore new things. In retirement, one of the things I'm doing is I'm playing mandolin a lot and taking lessons and so forth. And one of the kinds of music I've gotten into the last couple of years is just really interesting and fun is Brazilian choral music.
Yeah.
And I'd never done a lot with that before, and it's really fun. So it's good to keep yourself fresh and to try new things and see what you can do.
Besides, you can impress our 13-year-old granddaughter with, if you know her music. So.
That's right. I know. Yeah, the other day, not the other day, but maybe 8 months ago, she was talking about people she was listening to. And she said, well, I'm listening to this one singer that you probably never heard of. Who's that? Billie Eilish. She goes, I know Billie Eilish. I left out a couple too. Her parents didn't know Billie Eilish, but I did. So, I got a lot of grandparent points on that one.
It's amazing to me, and I feel like this is always a really challenging conversation to have, because there are so many insecurities that we either adopt or assume as public school art educators, public school music teachers, band, orchestra, choir teachers, that frustrate me, and that when you start talking about the things that you're trying or you're doing, there's this competitive perception of like, well, that's what you're doing, but I couldn't do that, or I don't want to do that, or that doesn't make your program better than mine. And I'm always frustrated by that, because to me, we hear in the dialogue about public school education, and particularly about what the arts can offer in public schools, the opportunities to be divergent and creative and imaginative. And yet we are building programs that are doing the opposite, that are restricting what students are experiencing and how they're learning music and how they're performing. I feel fortunate, and by no means had I, quote unquote, figured anything out. I mean, there was so much that I was learning and experimenting with, and I still reflect on and think about, what could I have done differently or done better when I was teaching in public schools, and making a transition into being in higher ed and teaching teachers. I feel this overwhelming pressure. Bob, I love the way you said it of, are you going to be preparing your students for your past or for their future? And trying to navigate, what does it look like to just approach your students and ask them, what kind of music are you interested? What would you like to play? Because they clearly don't have the expertise that you do. You go and achieve a degree, and every state in the United States, you have to have at least a bachelor's degree to be teaching, in some states a master's degree. Clearly you have content knowledge and skills that the students don't have. But some of my most rewarding moments, and I can say this sincerely, was asking my students what they were interested in playing and then programming that. And it was a lot of work. And Pam, as you said, like, I had to claim ignorance. Like, I'm not familiar with that artist. Like, show them to me. Let me listen to that. And get to invite the students to create sort of their own musical analysis and find value in music that was not necessarily programmed or you weren't going to find in a catalog.
Well, Chris, I would say a couple of things you hit on. So first of all, the whole insecurity issue. Look, as arts educators, of course we're insecure, because there's no music teacher in America that doesn't sit there and go, I'm not good enough. I didn't practice enough. My ears aren't good enough. I'm not musical. And you know what I mean?
I didn't sit high enough up in the section.
I didn't sit high. I wasn't first chair the whole way. Every person on the planet has those insecurities as an arts educator. And so I think, part of overcoming that is you have to do a couple things. You have to say to yourself, I can't be the source of all knowledge. I have to learn too. And the kids, I can learn with the kids. I can learn from the kids.
Yeah.
I'm a facilitator in a classroom. I don't have to have all the answers. And when you let that go and say, I don't have to have all the answers, it frees you up to be more creative and have more fun. And I'll tell you a quick story about that, and then talk about technique.
Yeah.
So one of my friends, really well-known string education professor at the college level, was a little bit younger than me, and he was teaching in an environment that was highly, highly, highly competitive, and you were ranked and constantly within your district, within a very large district, as to how you were doing And if you were basically, are you winning or not? And it was just, he was just driving him crazy. And so he came to a performance in the summertime of my Celine fiddle group, and he had kids were all up there just playing fiddle tunes, singing, improvising, having fun. And he said, I just started to cry. He said, I broke down and cried. He said, right there. He said, thank goodness it was a dark room and nobody saw me. But he said, I just realized I can't do this anymore. I can't be this person that's driven by competition and trying to one up everybody else in my area. He said, this is what music should be. The kids are playing with joy, having fun. Not that you can't have standards, not saying that. Yeah. So let me get to the technique part. Yeah. You still got it. The whole point in giving, helping kids with technique, which we know how to do, is to give them the skills so that they can access music and various kinds of music the way they want to. You have to give them the technical skills, whether it be breathing for singers, whether it be embouchure or breathing for wind players, whether it be bowings, articulations for strings. You still have to give them those skills. But the bigger problem is not that. If you only give them that and literacy, but without the oral skills, you really limited their ability to access things. And I guess I would add two other things. What I always advise young teachers to do is don't be afraid to let kids know what you don't know. I mean, you're in it together, you're working, but also I would say, I guess this is a getaway. It's okay to be slightly vulnerable. That's what I'm saying. And I had a recent experience with that all the string people will relate to. Pam and I were asked to come back and help. The Suzuki catalog just did a major redo of the book 1 through 3 recordings, and our artist was Hilary Hahn. Now I'm going to tell you, I got to co-produce those 3 CDs with 2 other people.
It was a very tense 3 days.
Yeah, let me tell you something. Talk about being vulnerable and having to admit what you don't know. I'm in the room with one of the greatest artists in the last 50 years. Yeah. And really, I'm going to produce the album, but I had a skill set that did allow me to do that. But there were certain things, you had to let go, because you had to say, look, I no matter how long I've taught strings, I don't know as much about the violin as she does. And certainly the artistic interpretations,
Or she was hearing things that
she was hearing stuff that nobody in the room could hear, including a really well-known sound engineer.
Yeah.
But anyway, so the point is with all that is we need to give kids technique. That's part of what we do. We have to teach them to count, all those kind of things, and when to put fingers down, or how to buzz, how to support air column for singers. We have to give them all those skills. But then we also have to help them to be literate. We also have to give them oral skills so that they can be self-learners and self-teachers. Because that's our goal, is to work ourselves out of a job. That's our goal as a music teacher. Work yourself out of a job. They don't need us anymore.
Absolutely.
We've watched many, many students over the years. The ones who do not have technique on their instrument or vocal technique, they reach a point, even in the oral traditions, where they're a bit held back by their lack of technique. So it's not something that's negated by using other styles of music in your programming. It just expands the opportunities for ways to teach that technique. You're doing the same basic violin technique, no matter what the violinist is playing.
The bow's got to go back and forth, and the fingers have to go up and down. I mean, it doesn't matter. It's like as a bass player, I'm a bass player for all of you out there, so I know that just probably reduced my credibility a lot. But anyway, as a bass player, I always in clinics tease and say that, look, I played a lot of kinds of music growing up playing the bass. Why? Because look, a 1 and a 5, it's no matter what kind of music it's going on top of it, it's still 1 and 5. So, that's oversimplification, but there's a lot of truth to that. Bass lines aren't so different genre to genre.
Yeah.
You got to play roots a lot of times. You got to play some fifths. I mean, So
he had a good time when we recorded the recordings for Mariachi Philharmonic for that book. He was in the studio with a professional mariachi band that his co-author, had told us was the best one in the area. And he said every personality type and way of approaching their instrument was true. The guitarone player was a bass player, and so on and so on.
It was the same person. Yeah, the violin players were still violin players. The trumpet player was still a trumpet personality. It was unbelievable.
And that is a case where there are some different standards of technique. Didn't they play, like, the trumpet sound was very different?
Well, it's just a different kind of sound because it's
so you do have differences.
Right. The mariachi, in that case, what was interesting is, of course, they were all working mariachi players, which means they play outside and in restaurants that are noisy. So you play with a different kind of sound than if you're playing in a chamber music setting, and there's a reason for it. And I get that.
Right.
It's interesting to me. I am a hardcore pragmatist, and so hearing you talk about all these things, I'm thinking about some of the experiments, for lack of a better word, that I ran in my own program when I was teaching public school. And it always impressed me that my own insecurities were really the biggest struggle, because once I tried something, and as you already put, working yourself out of a job, when the students were in charge of a lot of those things, the excitement, the fun, as you put it, of having those students engaged, the old adage of you can lead a horse to water, but you can't get him to drink is the same thing. Like, you can create an amazing program. If your students don't want to learn and don't want to practice, they're not going to do it. And we had established, again, I didn't solve anything. There's so much that I still need and want to learn about teaching music in public schools. But something that I found relative success in, contextualized to my community, and I think it's important to say that because it's different in every city, in every district, at every campus. But in my city, I was at a Title I school, large Hispanic population, very much driven by popular high school culture, in loose quotes, in terms of Central Texas town, right? Friday Night Lights, the marching band, the dancers, like that's what was the culture at my high school. And so the orchestra, which was relatively new in the district, was young and so not engaged in pep rallies and sort of the popular culture of what the high school was. And I distinctly remember a student who was in band and orchestra. They played the euphonium in band and played violin in my orchestra, and had been in Suzuki, had played violin for years, but wanted that camaraderie and that engagement of being in the public limelight for these pep rallies and for the football games. They said to me in sort of a cavalier way, like, it's a shame the orchestra can't perform the pep rally. And just hearing him say that, I went, you're right. Like, why couldn't we? And therein started this. For years, my orchestra played the pep rallies. We played the homecoming pep rally every year. We performed on a football field. It was difficult because we had to navigate, obviously, sound and like mics, and do we do electric instruments, or there were lots of things to navigate. But hearing that student say that and then embarking on that journey, before I left, we had created this tradition. And you talk about polarity in programming. We went to the Texas Renaissance Festival. It's one of the biggest Renaissance festivals in the country. It's amazing. And they had this early music competition where you could perform Renaissance and Baroque music. They had band, choir, orchestra. So in the fall, we would be preparing for this contest, which is really exciting, and playing nothing but like Renaissance Risicars and like Baroque chaconnes and all of this period music. And it was right around October into November. So when homecoming was happening, at the same time, we were arranging and programming music straight off of the radio. So, just complete polarity in terms of genres. But it always surprised me. Always, and it shouldn't have. The students enjoyed playing all of the music because they were using their instrument. And I didn't have to sell Baroque music to them, and I didn't have to like win them over or deceive them by saying, okay, we're going to do a couple of, radio tunes to win you over. They just loved playing their instrument.
Well, interesting sidelight story. That part of what you're saying is teach the kids that are in front of you.
Yeah.
Right. And so, different communities, different cultures get established within communities. And sometimes you play to that. Like, people would say to me, well, Bob, why did you do, old time and bluegrass fiddling in Saline? Well, we were a rural farm town outside Ann Arbor. And when I started there, I had a lot of kids that grew up on farms, and it made a lot of sense.
And we also square dances at the Grange halls. And,
we've lived in an area where Henry Ford, we had Grange schools all over the place. Now nobody went to them now, but in the 30s, 40s, into the 50s, there's all these little Grange halls. And Henry Ford used to send out fiddlers, and they'd square dance once a week in all these schools. And I had a lot of grandparents and parents that grew up in that era where they did that, right? So it was pretty organic to our thing. One of my best friends, Judd Fritzmeyer, he taught in the town next to me, and he, for no other reason than we were doing old time bluegrass, he started a really great fiddle group called the Chelsea House Orchestra, and they went all Celtic for that just because we were right next to each other. And he said, yeah, let's not compete for the same gigs. Let's just, so we play bluegrass festivals, and he'd play Celtic festivals. And it worked great,
Yeah.
And so I think that whole teaching the kids that are in front of you, is important. I think the accessing, all different kinds of music, pop music, whatever, that is really important for kids, because it may not be music that they play 20 years from now, but just the excitement of learning something and learning how to do it and translate it onto your instrument is exciting. And for those of you if there's any choir or wind people out there, the big revolution that's happened in string playing in the last 30 years, 40 years is string players crossing over to every genre possible.
Yeah. Violin
players, doesn't matter what it is, hip hop or rock or jazz or whatever it is, they're playing everything. And that's a good thing, right? That's a great thing. One of the local teachers, in fact, our daughter, we have two daughters that are orchestra teachers. One of them teaches in a district where the high school director took his top ensemble one year. Instead of going to festival, to traditional orchestra festival, he took them to the jazz festival that the band directors went to, and he used tunes out of Fiddler's Philharmonic, a book that I wrote with
probably jazz.
Jazz Philharmonic, Jazz Philharmonic, a book that I wrote with Randy Sabine. And they had the kids learn to improvise and stuff, and it was a great experience. He said it was just great. Now, it really shook people up in the area. People were like, what is he doing? And
another thing we witnessed, though, from that sort of thing, that's probably more possible with different styles of music than it is with Western straight up classical type music, is it creates a camaraderie within the music department. The people have all that in common to talk about. Yes, you went to, the band director can say to the orchestra director, you went to our jazz band festival. You're building common ground in different ways.
And another example would be, I'll never forget this moment. So the kids, there was a period of time in Saline where some of the kids were doing fiddling and some were not. And they've been exposed to it at younger ages, but in the high school level, by that time, some were just doing the classical orchestra thing, some were doing that and hardcore fiddling and some rock and some jazz. I'll never forget the moment when we pulled out Brandenburg 3 and read it. I said, okay, we're going to do this next concert. Here we go. Put it out. We started to play. Well, you had two very fundamental different reactions. The kids whose background was, even though they had been teaching a lot of oral skills, they had been definitely more literacy focused.
Yeah.
They were reading, and they would slow down. If they missed a note, they had a tendency to want to stop and get it or stop or whatever. The fiddle kids, the kids that were really, skilled at improvising and all that kind of thing, they didn't care if they missed a note. All they cared about was the bow and the dance. And they kept saying it was all about the groove, because you kept hearing all around the room kids going, playing the groove, playing the groove. It drove them crazy because they heard a dance. They heard that, they heard the lilt, right? And they just then it sounded like a Scottish fiddle tune, in a lot of ways. They wanted to go, and it was just a fundamentally different kind of reaction and experience.
Could you explain what a groove is? Because that is a question I get from teachers who have no
groove is just
background. They're like, what's that?
Well, the groove is just the underlying rhythmic structure underneath the piece. So in swing, it's like in the cymbal going,
Yeah.
Is the groove, right? And so, and for contemporary musicians, most of the music of the world is groove based primarily. It's rhythmically based. It's very rhythmically driven. Western classical music is much more harmonically driven.
Yeah.
It's much more focused around complex harmonic changes and lengthy
forms.
Yeah, lengthy forms and structures. So most of the music of the rest of the world is easier to access in one way because the forms in general are much shorter and more comprehensible, and they can be learned by ear and remembered. Part of the thing with classical music is you can create incredible intricacy over time because there is the literacy element. Because most professional orchestras, while they could memorize a Mahler symphony, it'd take a while.
Yeah.
There wouldn't be a lot of performing going on. You've got to be able to have, literacy creates that intricacy and length over time. Now, certainly, can you have in jazz and fiddling, can you have things that are absolutely as intricate? Yes, but they tend to happen over harmonic and rhythmic structures that are shorter and more comprehensible, rememberable. That's why you can learn them by ear.
Well, you mentioned the skills earlier, which I totally appreciate. I would often sort of correct my students. This is a pet peeve that I had, that when they would be asked by, colleagues, it might be at like a regional event or just talking to other students, they'd say, what are you working on? I was always frustrated when I'd hear students, and they say, well, what are you working on? Oh, well, we're working on Brandenburg 3, right? Or we're working on this Mozart Sinfonietta or whatever. And I'd say, no, I never want you to respond that way. You need to be working on technique. You need to say, I'm working on shifting, or we're exploring D flat major, or the goal of this ensemble is to teach you how to express yourself musically on a string instrument. I'm not trying to teach you pieces, I'm trying to teach you how to express yourself with this instrument. And I think when you take that shift and you recognize there is, this is arguably a cliche, but there truly is so much more that unites us in the musical world than divides us. We have rhythm, we have harmony, we have melody, right? We have these expressive, dynamics or articulations, how long or how short, how fast or how slow. We can talk tempo. These are, universal concepts around the world. And when you're training to be a music educator, to be fair, and I'm seeing this firsthand, there's so much you have to do in such a short amount of time, right? It's a lifelong journey to become an educator. So the idea that we push people through a program or 4 or 5 years and you're good to go, kind of a fallacy. It's this lifelong pursuit. But you are required, almost every music teacher preparation program in the country, you take arranging or you take orchestration and you take some of these classes, and it's always amazing to me that people either feel intimidated or frustrated by doing that. And Pam, I'm curious if you can talk into this, because I know some of it might be a copyright scare, but I'm always amazed that more people aren't writing or arranging. I worked with an incredible colleague, Cordero Salazar, if he's watching, who sort of came into his own. He's a middle school orchestra director and was using a ton of books, like cycling through books, and never really found a method book or a technique book that worked. And I was the high school director. He had taken over for me in the middle school. And I was working with him one day, and he was talking about a skill that he wanted them to attain. And he sort of spontaneously was like, well, I just want you to try this. And he sort of started talking to them, and he wrote it up on the board. And I went up to him, and I was like, that was amazing. And I was like, that was great. And he's like, yeah, I didn't know because it didn't come from the book. And I was like, that doesn't mean anything. Like, you're a competent musician. You know how music works. Write something. And so every day after that, he would go home, he'd spend a few minutes, he'd write a warm-up, and then he would come and he'd write it up on the board and have the kids play. And then he started, this was in about a month span of time. I came back and I was observing him, and he was having the students write it. He had made this game out of it, like, all right, somebody pick a rhythm, and someone would clap a rhythm, and he'd use his oral skills he got in college to do rhythmic dictation. And then he'd say, someone give me a key. He was using everything he had to learn as an undergrad, but it was incredible to see how dynamic that is when you're teaching. So the question, Pam, that I'm referring to you about is, I get the sense, because I suffered this when I was working with popular music, that maybe some of the apprehension of arranging your own music or writing your own music or doing those things is being afraid of copyright and like, can I actually arrange this, or am I going to get in trouble if I'm borrowing from something? What do you guys think?
Well, my gut feeling is it goes back to the insecurity more than copyright. Um, there is a fear generally of people, they know they are unsure about what the law really is. Because there's so many, like, whatever, urban legends or whatever you want to call them, that go around about copyright, and everybody hears them and it's like, well, is that really true? And so that is a factor, but I think it's more the insecurity of, I'm not a good enough musician to write music. You know, that feeling. But
You don't have to have a license.
no,
Right?
true. But we're, for something original, like his warm-ups that were original, copyright doesn't factor in at all.
Yeah.
Except that it would be good to put his name at the bottom, you know, as the writer, and with a little copyright sign. And then if somebody else tried to publish them, it would be obvious that it belonged to somebody else, that they were his. All it takes on original music is, you know, the name of, you can make up a name as your label or your own personal name and the copyright symbol and the year on the piece, and you've got it copyrighted as far as being legal. It doesn't have to go through the Copyright Office in Washington, D.C. and be a registered copyright to be considered legally copyrighted. That also works the other way with pop music. It is not okay to arrange that. If it belongs to somebody else, if it says, you know, by Katy Perry or by Michael Jackson or Disney or whoever, that is not okay to arrange it for your students.
Yeah.
It's okay to play a cover. You don't necessarily write it down. You just teach it to them orally, and you just play the melody in unison, say, or something. You can do it, what's called a cover. It's a gray line between what's a cover and an arrangement. If it changes the character of the music. Well, there's that could be argued, you know, forever, but that's what the law is based on. But to do an arrangement, to arrange it for orchestra, for concert band, for choir, you do need a license, which usually costs money, not terribly much for most educational uses. But you do need to, like a marching band, a show choir, anybody that's performing in public that way, absolutely can get in trouble if they don't follow that rule. And that means planning ahead so that you give the publisher time. At this point in time, Alfred Music and Hal Leonard Music administer the copyrights to most pop music and movies and that kind of thing. Though movies are mostly sound effects now, so there's not always, you know, something that.
Sometimes it's hard to find a melody.
Yeah, he struggled with which ones. Some of them have been really interesting.
They're pretty cute, you know. There are a lot of cues, sound cues, but they're not necessarily.
Well, it's crazy to me because, Pam, hearing you talk about it, I was struck by the idea of there's sort of this like sanctity of these published works. And this, you know, in no way to diminish the things you guys have accomplished, because like I said, Bob, I've used your books for years. I distinctly remember a good friend of mine that teaches in North Texas, Matt Moreno. I was blown away because we were using the Orchestra Expression series. Like, we were both using that for our beginners. And I was talking to him at a conference at TODA, the Texas Orchestra Directors Association, talking at a conference, and I was saying, like, here's what I'm doing with my beginners, and we're doing this, and I was like, but I'm really frustrated because I haven't been able to get them. I distinctly remember this. I was like, we're trying to get past Unit 16. I'm trying to get them past Unit 16. And this was obviously in the summer, and he was like, he's like, well, when do you do that? So we're trying to get there by December. And he's like, you're doing Unit 16 in December? And I was like, yeah. And immediately the insecurities, right? I'm thinking, oh my gosh, he probably gets there faster than I do. And he's like, you know, I don't do Unit 16 until like February. And I was like, it takes you that long? And he goes, what do you mean takes you that long? I was convinced, and I'm a young educator at this point, it's probably my third year of teaching. I had to start at Unit 1, and I had to go through in chronological order to get to Unit, and we had to use that method that way. And he absolutely blew my mind because he says, no, I start in Unit 1, and then I jump over to Unit 4, and then I go pull Sound Innovations off the shelf, and I use a unit from there to teach High 2. I like the way that teaches it. And I couldn't believe that I had been so married to this idea that the way it's published, once it's published, like that is sacred work. It has to be done that way, and I can't deviate from it or I'll confuse the students. Like, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, look,
You're not the only one.
no, as
Yeah.
an author, I will tell you the reason I used lots of different method books, and I supplemented an awful lot. That's how I got to write books, is because I was writing a lot of those materials. What you're trying to do as an author, you're trying to come up with a logical sequence, and we agree on the sequence in the United States. It's not that different book
Yeah.
to book and book one. We agree on this, and so
kind of want to make sure nothing gets left out.
yeah, the big thing you have to do, so as an author in those books, what you're doing is a logical technical sequence for kids and teachers. You're trying to also introduce all the literacy issues that they have to be able to do to move on to that second year and access literature. So a lot of times you're putting a lot more stuff in there than you'd probably like to. You'd also like to have more time to develop things, unit by unit. But the problem is, we know that you have to get to a certain point in most programs, the average program in the United States. So those books are all geared toward that. It's like, this is about how far we think kids need to get in order to be at that, sixth grade level or that whatever it is. So certainly everybody's program and students are individual. We start beginning string instruction as early as kindergarten in this country and as late as high school.
Yeah.
We meet as infrequently as 20 minutes every other week and as often as 90 minutes a day. Well, we can't compare those results.
It's totally different.
Yeah, math teachers in general, science teachers, the core curriculum teachers, I think music's core also. But
I was gonna say it's all core now. Careful.
all core now. but the idea is, I misspoke. But the idea is
Traditional
The-
academic,
yeah, right.
what do you call them now?
yeah, right. But math, science, they have a pretty the amount of time they get level by level is very common throughout the country.
Yeah.
It's not disparate. Ours is incredibly disparate. So, that's why you have to take all those materials as a resource and say,
Yeah.
what works for my kids and my structure? Depends how much oral teaching you're doing. Depends how much maybe you're doing composition things. Maybe some people want to go a lot faster, some want to go a lot slower. I'll just reinforce your point, Dr. Hanson, that, I was doing there was a long series of years where I did a lot of residencies and clinics and stuff in schools. And I was in this school and there were 3 or 4 teachers, string teachers, and they had a young string teacher that was just been there a couple of years and was struggling with their beginners. And the old teachers, there was a high school teacher that probably taught 6, 7 years, was doing fine and really well. And a middle school teacher taught a long time. And the elementary teacher was really struggling. So they wanted me to evaluate and help her. And so I came in to work with all the students at all the levels. Well, I walked into her class. They met twice a week for about 35, 40 minutes, something like that. And it was
in a cafeteria.
So they had a little setup time in there.
Right.
It was now about the second week in October, and they started after Labor Day. And she was on page 22 of the method book out of 48. Well, trust me, there were big problems because the kids, what she was doing
She was turning pages.
She was turning pages.
Wow.
And it made her feel good to turn pages. And she was looking at the book and not looking at the kids.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah.
So the positions were erect, and she was pushing them through literacy issues, but they couldn't play anything. So to me, and this is one of my messages, my whole teaching career has been this: if they don't look good and sound good, nothing else matters. In other words, your goal is you have to get them physically set up. Doesn't matter whether it's the voice, breathing, whether it's embouchure, whether it's tongue articulation, whether it's bow articulation. You have to give them the physical setup to be able to produce sound. Okay. Secondarily, they have to sound good. The number one kids drop out is they don't think they're very good at it. And the reason they don't think they're very good at it is they don't sound good.
And they know.
And they know.
Yeah.
So to me, I would rather a student come out of first year of instruction, no matter what the discipline, and be able to play 5 tunes, beginner tunes, beautifully with great sound and articulate everything else, than to play 45 tunes poorly or to go through 2 books.
Yeah.
So, and that's totally unique to your situation and the pace your kids can handle and the time on task you have and the setup in the room and the technology you have, all those things.
I
The
definitely
socioeconomic,
felt
I mean,
that
that's
pressure.
that's huge,
Yeah.
right? Whether some kids in, particularly in low socioeconomic areas, don't have a place to practice at home. That's difficult for them because they're in dense living situations and they can't do. Whereas sometimes, you have kids in middle class or upper middle class where they have, parents are giving them lessons, right? All this stuff that happens. Well, you can't compare those results
Yeah.
because it's different resources.
And even at the high school level, an upper level, apply to get in statewide high school in one state we know is that has a very excellent music program, but it's a math and science school that kids apply to from around that state. And so that's their focus.
Yeah.
Orchestra and band are second, and their teacher, I don't know if I'm allowed to say his name or not.
But it's very high level.
But he knows that. He programs for that. He knows when their busy times are. But he has a very high level orchestra also.
Well, Bab, I'm glad you brought it up because I can remember a culture shock for me. So I grew up in Houston, huge metropolitan area in Texas, and then moved out to Central Texas and was teaching out there. This was a humbling moment for me because I strive to this day. I strive to create a very welcoming and inclusive environment in my classroom and really think about my student first. And I had been reflecting on the mother tongue approach, right? Suzuki is infamous for this mother tongue approach. And I was looking at those materials and thinking about my students because I wasn't happy with the way that they sounded. I didn't appreciate the sound. And this is my varsity ensemble. It just didn't have that clarity. They weren't really locking in together, and I didn't understand where it was coming from. And I was thinking about the mother tongue approach and the significance of, Suzuki saying you completely immerse the child in music and you give them all of these great examples to listen to and experience. And this is a shout out to the Austin Opera. They had this incredible program called Opera at Night where you could get free tickets to watch the dress rehearsal. And so we used to do that. I would take the kids to the opera, and I had a busload of probably about 25 kids. It was it was the beginning of the high school orchestra, so we had maybe about 50 kids in the program. I had 25 that signed up to go one night, which was a huge commitment because the dress rehearsal was like 8 p.m. to 11 p.m. Like it was a long, it's this huge opera and like with the intermission and everything. So they all came and they like dressed up, and we were there and we saw the opera, and I gave them a synopsis so they could follow it. It was this great experience, and we're on the bus driving back. And I heard the kids sort of clamoring and sort of talking about something, and like a good teacher, started eavesdropping, right? So I'm like leaning over listening, and they started talking about, and this was typical orc dorks, right? So we go to an opera, and the entire time they were staring in the pit, and they weren't paying attention to the stage. They were watching the pit, and they said it sounded like a CD. Like it sounded like a recording, but these people were doing this live and they were talking about it, and I'm giddy. And then someone made the admission. They said, that was the first time I had ever heard an orchestra live. And the whole bus lit up and they all said, yeah, this was my first time hearing an orchestra.
Yeah.
And it was this like terrifying realization for me. I grew up hearing the Houston Symphony every Sunday with my grandfather. He got a season subscription, and that was our thing that we did. Every Sunday we went to the Houston Symphony because I was, playing violin in middle school and I was passionate about it. So my family wanted to support that. And then I'm in a small Central Texas town. It doesn't have a professional symphony. It was close enough to Austin that we could drive there, but these students never went to the Austin Symphony. It wasn't a part of their life. And there's no judgment in that. I mean, it just was not a part of how they lived their life. It wasn't their reality. So it was this huge epiphany for me that I said, wait a minute, if I can't ask someone to speak perfect Chinese if they've never heard Chinese before. This literally is a foreign language for my students. And we made this sort of cultural shift of I played more recordings in class, and whatever the genre was, it wasn't just classical music. I really tried to get them to listen to the music we were studying and performing, and it was transformative. I mean, not that Suzuki needs any confirmation that it works, but it was amazing to me that I had taken for granted my students' experiences and their realities, and then shifting that dynamic totally changed the sound of my kids.
Well, that gets to that whole oral skills part, right?
Yeah.
And so to me, that's part of that whole message, because for me, starting right away with beginners, teaching tunes by ear all the way through, the kids are always learning. Part of their instruction is happening by ear, and they have to learn by ear. And is that easier for some kids than others? Yes.
Yeah.
But the literacy is easier for some kids than others too.
Yeah.
Right. And so our job is to teach everybody and do the differentiation necessary to make it work for everyone, and to get them down that path. But the higher their oral skills, the more oral skills you help them to achieve, the more flexible they are in what they can learn. And I would also say this: I maintain most classical music is actually learned orally anyway. In other words,
Yeah.
It's another form of modeling.
Yeah.
Bach, for example, if you're going to play, Brandenburg is a good example. You're going to play Brandenburg. Well, how do kids learn to play Mozart or Bach? They sit in an orchestra, and they listen to other kids around them. They let the modeling that's going on from the teachers. They play recordings, and they learn how to do articulations and phrasing and all that stuff by listening. Because most of what happens in music is not written on the page.
Yeah.
And very little of it's written on the page. In other words, I maintain if you taught students for 4, 5, 6 years, 7 years, whatever, all the way up through high school, and they'd never heard nor seen music of the classic period, Mozart, Haydn, and put it in front of them, would it sound like that? No, because they have no oral reference.
Yeah.
So we teach a lot of what we teach orally anyway. So just embrace it for what it is and say, yeah, that's the key to everything. Yeah, literacy is important. I'm not saying literacy is not important, but if you can't look at it, if the kids can't look at a piece of music and audiate it, then you're not going to get anything that sounds like music coming back, right? So you have to have the oral skills first in order to be able to audiate the literacy piece.
And oral skills doesn't mean just learning fiddling or jazz riffs or whatever orally. It's everything. It's pitch detective games.
It's teaching spiccato, teaching shifting, whatever. It's always, to me, it's always easier to teach music with music. It's way easier, and it's easier to teach orally by using music and by using sound to teach the various technical things you want them to learn.
I just came across a reference, this metaphor that's used in a general methods book that I'm using. I'm teaching a general methods course, which is intense because I'm a secondary instrumental educator. Like, that's my passion. And so I'm working with these future educators and talking about general music. And this was really impactful for me. And it reminds me exactly what you guys just said. It gave this analogy that you would not teach someone the alphabet before they knew how to speak. Like, as human beings learn, we start to master our language skills first by modeling what we're hearing. It's the mother tongue approach. But even in early childhood education, we're teaching kids words. We're teaching them words by sight, recognizing that, this picture of a cat is a cat. And then they learn these phonemes and these letters and recognize these symbols to create words so they can be better communicators and can understand. And it used that in this general methods text, and I thought I'd never really appreciated it that way, because I can openly admit I never did as much oral skills and training as I could have or needed to, because I was really passionate about teaching my kids how to read that's the first thing they needed to do. But if they can't speak, if they can't hear the music first, the symbols and the notes, and I learned quickly, we were using flashcards. I was like, it's great that this kid could tell me that the note on that line is a B, but it doesn't have any meaning, right? They can't hear it. It doesn't mean anything to them. It's a symbol.
Well, and I would also say about teaching oral skills to any music educator, look, you may not have, let's put it this way. I had lots of students that had ears that were way better than mine because I started them down that path early and made sure that they did have better ears than I did. And that was the whole point.
Yeah.
And I had some students, the same thing with improvisation. We used to started teaching improvisation first year, and then I had a whole process that I did with kids. And I have some students that are just astounding professional artists now, great improvisers, and they can do things I couldn't even dream about doing. But that's no different. The fact that you can't do it at their level doesn't mean that you don't teach it. Could I coach a student on a violin solo in high school in preparation? Well, let's do this, all state auditions.
Yeah.
You're preparing a kid, helping them learn their excerpts, okay? They want some help. Could you help them do that even though you can't play that excerpt on that instrument as well as they can? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because you're a musician, right? Well, it's the same thing. That you don't let that hold you back. Yeah, if I'm preparing kids in the orchestra, I can play the bass excerpts, but I can't play the cello excerpt or the violin excerpt at the level that a really good high school kid can. But I can help them learn it. I have a process.
Yeah.
Same thing with improvisation.
You can analyze and give them feedback.
Give them
Absolutely.
feedback. Same thing with improvisation. You just start doing it. You just start incorporating it. And here's a message I would give to all educators. There's a real danger in going to music conferences. And I'll tell you what it is. The danger in music conferences is you go here go to the ASTA conference, and you go, there's 16 sessions, 18 sessions an hour. You can hear all these great experts in each thing. By the end of the day, you go, I'm a terrible teacher because I don't do any of that stuff. Well, yeah, neither did they when they were young, and they don't do everything that everybody else did all day. They know their part really well. So in other words, my point is you have to go to conferences or in-service training or listen to things like this, and you say, there's an idea. I'm going to take that one idea and play with that. I'm going to see if I can get better at that. So improvisation, do you start with a full course on improvisation with high school? No. You take your beginners and say, okay, Twinkle, Twinkle. Hey, kids, here we go. We just learned how to play Twinkle, Twinkle. Really cool. Wonder if we could play that with a different ending. Instead of doing those last two bars the way that we learned it, how could we change that?
Yeah.
You're teaching improvisation. You're teaching composition. You do little things at a time and gain your own skill sets and learn. Because a lot of what you did when you were writing exercises, or your friend was you were figuring out what worked and what didn't for your kids. And that's what you do in the classroom. You have the greatest laboratory ever because you get to go in every day, and especially if you teach, like as a string teacher, I taught, a lot of levels all day. And I would always go in because what I found was this. The only thing that ever held kids back was me. It was only me. It was never anything except for me. That's what held them back. So I look in the mirror and go, what can you do to fix that? The other thing that would happen to me is since I taught all levels, you'd go into high school and you go, man, my freshman can't do this. It's all the fault of that middle. Oh, wait a minute. I am the middle school teacher. It's got to be the fault of the No, I am the elementary teacher. Okay. So then you start backing everything up and you say, yeah, maybe I should really address that in 8th grade. Maybe I should address that in 7th grade. Pretty soon you do that long enough and you figure out, you try to get everything right the first year. And you start setting all the groundwork for everything. And I think the greatest experience any music teacher could have is if you could ever teach for a year or two doing the whole program by yourself, like all 8 or 9 years or 7 years, whatever it is, you would find that it gives you a really different perspective on technique, pedagogy, repertoire, everything, because you see them all the way through. And
but you can't do everything the same year to year because, the class may have different strengths or weaknesses year to year.
Right.
So it's got to be monitor and adjust. That's a saying in our family that means, you better look at what you're doing because with so many, a family full of teachers, they all like to say, well, Mom, just monitor and adjust. Well, wait a minute, let's back that truck up. But,
Mom said you monitor and adjust.
but it is the truth. And it's the truth in any walk of life, not just teaching.
And look,
business is not the same year to year, and the same job. Science.
Yeah, every generation is different.
You have to monitor and adjust.
Yeah, and the fun part is just going in every year, engaging your kids, and you get better. You just keep trying to get better. To me, burnout. Pam and I do a whole clinic on. There's a lot of issues with burnout, but one issue is, and this is again one of my other little, besides the preparing kids for my future. Am I preparing them for my past or their future? The other one I said is, do I want to teach 30 years or do I want to teach the same year 30 times?
Wow.
I didn't want to teach the same year 30 times. So it looked for me, now I'm high creative. So to me, I was constantly messing with the curriculum and changing and trying new things every year for no other reason to just see, what if there's another way I could get that across? Yeah. And that gives you that skill set. So then when you get kids that, wow, this person, because I don't care what you do and how good you are. You stand up and teach something, there's a percentage of the kids that get it and there's a percentage that don't. It doesn't matter how good you are. But if you have a deep enough, bag of tricks, of things you can go to and go, well, that didn't work for this kind of kid. Wonder why? Well, how do I get that kind of kid to get there? Right? Because that's our job. And the other thing is, I think that's part and parcel of that is what you're also saying in a really, to me, a really good music program ought to have all kinds of kids in it. It ought to look like the school. If the music program doesn't look like the school, then why? Yeah. Well, it means you're only addressing the needs of a certain type of student.
Wow. Yeah.
And that's not really what public education should be all about. We should be able to, leave no child left behind is right. We don't want to leave any kids behind. And we got to help every kid find success in some way. That means you got to have a lot of different ways to get to the center of the pie, not just one route. And that's really the greatness in teaching, I think. And it's also, I would say, it's our fundamental mission to help every child succeed and figure out how to succeed. To me, that trumps having an elite group.
But that is a philosophical decision for a music department or the teacher of that ensemble to make. Do you want only the students in your program that are totally committed and that's all they do is music? They're not in a sport, they don't run track, they don't do robotics, whatever it is, or do you want to find a place for everybody?
For me, my answer was I couldn't teach in that kind of elite program. I had to keep every kid I could involved in every way.
You never give up on anybody.
Yeah, you never give up. Yeah. Right, never give up on a kid. And so, because I just believed in them. I believe everybody could be successful in one way or another. And so now we did wind up with some very high-end groups that came out of that. But I also maintain that should be a place for everybody. That really high-end group that's going to play in Chicago or going to play at your state conference, whatever. Sure, that's a great thing. But if there aren't 3-4 groups in the school besides that, there's got to be a place for that kid who loves music, just thinks this is really great, but they're doing a lot of other things. And they can't practice the amount of time it takes to be in a more elite ensemble. But that's no different than the rest of our curriculum, right? There's different kinds of math classes for kids in a school. Not every kid needs to take,
AP
statistics. Yeah. And we have a daughter.
Our daughter teaches AP.
AP statistics. Yeah. And that's a great class. It's a really good class for the students that need that and want that. But there's other kinds of math that are important for kids too. Everybody needs to be taking a math class because that's a life skill, right? But just what the level is, you want to do it at. So I think music should be the same way. You shouldn't have to be, because what always disturbs me about when you see a program where there's huge dropouts and the high school programs are extremely elite and there's no place for other kinds of kids, who gets to make that decision?
Yeah.
Right? It's like the pros. Well, I had a friend that was played in the Cleveland Orchestra for a number of years. And when he first got out of school, he was playing in an orchestra. And after a little while, he said, wow, I just don't I don't like this. And he said, I got to get a better gig. And he kept trying to audition up, but yet was his musical experience not good in that more regional orchestra? No, it was probably tremendous. It was his perception.
Yeah.
He finally got to Cleveland Orchestra, and he got to the same point. He said, I'm burned out, man. I got to get out. He was getting ready to go out and try to get another degree. And, Cleveland's a pretty good band. I mean, that's a pretty good orchestra, right? So it doesn't get a lot better than that. Until he woke up one day and said, yeah, the problem's not the group, the problem's me. He goes, it's what I'm trying to, it was his own expectations, what he was trying to put on that. And finally he said, he stopped trying to play for everybody else and the people around him. He started playing for himself and just loving music. And he said, it changed everything. He loved going to work every day. He said, I could also gone back to that first group I played in. I would have been fine because I had a different perspective.
I can't believe our time has gone so fast, but I promise to everyone listening, this was not planned. This could not be a more perfect sentiment to end our conversation on, thinking about how we can be more diverse in our programming and explore alternative styles. And as Bob said, teach the kid in front of you. We need to welcome everybody, and we need to have a place for everyone in our program, and not be afraid to be vulnerable, not be afraid to not know in front of the students, and invite them to a place where they can learn to be musicians, and they don't have to learn to perform and act and think in one way. We can welcome everybody to the table. I'm so glad that this conversation led to that, because it is a perfect cadence to, I think, what the whole point of diversifying the music curriculum and the art curriculum really looks like and what it means. I want to thank you guys so much for being here. I undoubtedly will be reaching out to you guys again just to talk to you as friends and colleagues, but hopefully even engage you in another teacher talk so we can learn more about the wonderful things you guys are doing. I don't believe you're retired. I think that's just a front, because you guys have so much more to offer. Thank you for this time. I'm going to end the Facebook live feed, and then I'll come over to end the Zoom session with you guys, and thank you again. For everybody that's watching, thank you for tuning in and making comments and just watching this. I will upload this to our playlist on YouTube, so if you came in a little later, if you've missed any of this, the full conversation will be available. Please make sure you come back next Sunday at noon Pacific Standard Time. I'll be having another conversation with a friend and colleague about music and education and the wonderful things that we can be planning and thinking about in this unique time. Bob and Pam, thank you again so much. I hope you stay safe and healthy. And for everybody listening, please take care of yourselves, and I'll look forward to seeing you guys and talking with you more in the future.
Thanks, Chris.